Today we have a really cool video for you guys. It'll be a collection of 4 stories that are all fan favorites, and they all share a theme: camping horror stories. Story 1. The last thing Marcus remembered before the sun came up was that the horse had been standing 3 feet from the tree line for 2 hours, and it hadn't blinked once. Here's how he got there. Marcus Hale was the kind of man who needed silence the way other people need coffee. After 17 years working trauma surgery in a Philadelphia hospital, after the divorce, after the thing with his daughter that he still couldn't say out loud, he needed 2 weeks with nothing but trees and a sleeping bag and the specific mercy of total disconnection. He drove 7 hours north into the Adirondacks, into a stretch of forest so remote that his GPS had given up on him 40 minutes before he reached the trailhead. He parked. He shouldered a 50-pound pack. He walked. For 11 days, it was exactly what he needed. He set up camp in a clearing near a creek that ran fast and clear over smooth granite. He caught fish. He read. He slept 11 hours a night and woke up feeling like himself for the first time in 2 years. The forest was populated by the right things. A family of deer who visited the clearing at dusk, a single hawk who rode thermals above the ridge, the percussion of woodpeckers in the early morning. Normal. Right. On the 12th day, he found the horse. He was coming back from the creek with a full canteen when he saw it at the far edge of the clearing, standing with its back to him, partially screened by a row of young birches. His first reaction was confusion. He'd seen no farms for miles, no fencing, no power lines, none of the infrastructure that implied domesticated animals. His second reaction was the beginning of something he didn't name yet, because he was a rational man, and a single horse at the edge of a forest clearing did not by itself constitute a threat. He watched it for a while. It didn't move. He called out. Nothing. The horse's ears didn't rotate toward him, which a horse's ears always do. He clapped once. Sharp. Nothing. He told himself it was downwind. He told himself he was projecting. He went back to camp and made dinner. When he came out of his tent at 11 p.m. to use the latrine, the horse was closer. Not dramatically closer. Not movie horror closer. Maybe 40 feet, where before it had been 100. But the clearing was open. He would have heard hoofbeats on the ground, even in sleep. He was a light sleeper. Years of being on call had trained his body to surface at the smallest displacement of silence. He had heard nothing, and yet, closer. He stood in the cold dark with his flashlight aimed at it, and the horse did not react to the beam. It was a dark bay, or appeared to be. The light made everything ambiguous at that distance, with a heavy, broad chest and a tail that hung completely still, in a night where the birches were moving. He noticed that the leaves were moving. The tail wasn't. He went back to bed and did not sleep well. In the morning, it was gone. He made himself breakfast and almost convinced himself he'd imagined the whole thing. He broke down his camp methodically the way he always did, checking each stake, rolling the sleeping bag tight. He was just lifting his pack when he noticed the ground at the clearing's edge. No hoofprints. He was a man who'd spent 11 days in these woods. He knew what the ground looked like after a deer passed through, the soft impressions a raccoon left in the creek mud. The soil at the clearing's edge was soft from recent rain. An animal the size of a horse standing there for hours would have pressed deep, clear prints into that soil. There was nothing. Not a compressed blade of grass. Not a pushed-aside stone. He left anyway. He told himself this firmly. He left. He got 3 miles down the trail when he stopped. He stopped because the trail forked here, and he had walked this fork 11 days ago in the other direction, and he knew it went left toward the trailhead and right toward an area marked on his map as a restricted watershed, no public access. He had gone left 11 days ago. He had filed a trip plan. He knew exactly where he was going. The horse was standing on the left fork, not 50 feet ahead, in the middle of the trail, broadside to him, blocking passage. In full daylight now, and there were things he could see that he couldn't see at night. The coat was wrong, not the color, the texture. It didn't catch light the way a coat should, the way individual hairs catch and diffuse light and give a healthy animal a kind of sheen. This looked flat, like something that had been given the correct shape and approximate color, but hadn't been furnished with the details. He stood there for a long time. He was a trauma surgeon. He understood that the brain, under enough stress, could manufacture the wrong explanations and believe them completely. He understood confabulation, the mind's compulsive need to stitch coherent story out of incoherent data. He applied this understanding to himself as rigorously as he'd applied it to patients. He was stressed. He was sleep-deprived. He was alone. These were the conditions under which people saw things. He took a step forward. The horse did not move. He took another step. It turned its head, not toward him, away. As if something behind Marcus, something on the right fork, the restricted one, the one going deeper into the watershed, had caught its attention. And then slowly, with a kind of deliberate patience that no animal had any business demonstrating, it turned its entire body away from him and walked to the right fork and stopped there, facing into the trees, waiting. Marcus stood for a long time in the fork of the trail. He thought about the unbroken ground at the clearing's edge. He thought about the tail that didn't move when the birches did. He thought about a horse that turned its head not toward an approaching human, but a way that had positioned itself, he realized, at the exact junction that forced him to choose, and had positioned itself specifically at the exit he needed. He took the right fork. He told himself later, he's still telling himself, that he'd just been disoriented, that the trail split differently than he remembered, that he'd taken the right path and it had simply delivered him to a different trailhead farther east where a deer hunter named Cal had found him sitting on a fallen log at dusk, pack still on, staring at the road. Cal had driven him to his car. He'd been fine. He is fine. What he does not explain to people, what he has not explained to anyone, is that when he emerged from the trees at that unfamiliar trailhead, he turned around once, just to look. The horse was standing at the tree line, in the shadows where the trail disappeared into the dark. It was watching him go. It didn't blink. He has not gone back to the Adirondacks. He has not been camping since. He tells people it's because he got what he needed out of it. He tells people the 2 weeks did him good, reset him, and he's grateful for that, and he is, genuinely. But some nights, particularly the nights when the silence of his apartment gets thick in a way that reminds him of something he can't quite name, he'll walk to the window and look out at the street and find himself checking, just making sure that whatever might be standing there, if anything was standing there at all, is the kind of thing that blinks. If you've spent time alone in remote wilderness and felt watched without being able to confirm it, you know the particular texture of that feeling. You know it doesn't go away with a rational explanation. Marcus knows it too. If this story hit something in you, subscribe. There's more where this came from, and some of it is worse. But none of it is embellished. These accounts exist. They are out there, and they found me. Story 2. Here's the last thing I'll say before I get into this. I haven't been camping in 33 years. People ask me why, and I give them the easy answer. Bad knees, bad back, got old, got soft. That's not it. That's never been it. It was the summer of 1991. I was 22. My name is Raymond Gill, and I want it on record that I am not a man who frightens easily. I was between things that summer. Just out of the army, waiting on a job at my uncle's machine shop that wouldn't start until September, living at my parents' house in rural Kentucky, and going slowly out of my mind with the particular restlessness that follows structured living. My friend Dale Vickers, he's still alive, you can ask him, though he won't talk about this either, suggested a camping trip, 10 days in the Red River Gorge. We'd done it twice before in our late teens. We knew the area. We had good gear. We drove out on a Tuesday in early July, set up camp at a site we'd used before, a flat ledge above a creek with a fire ring someone had made from natural stone. It was a good site. It felt right. The first 3 days were what camping is supposed to be. Long hikes, cold water, fire at night, the specific piece of being somewhere that doesn't expect anything from you. The trouble started on the 4th day, and it started small. I was downstream from camp, maybe a quarter-mile fishing. Dale had gone the other direction, up toward the ridge, said he wanted to see the arch formation we'd spotted on our first day. I was alone, which I was comfortable with. The creek was cooperative. I was in the middle of a good rhythm. Then I heard someone walking on the far bank. Not unusual. In theory, the gorge is public land, hikers use it. I looked up, expecting to see another camper, and the far bank was empty. The sound stopped the moment I looked. I went back to fishing. 10 minutes later, the sound again. Footsteps, deliberate, moving parallel to me upstream, keeping pace. I looked up again. Nothing. I reeled in and walked back to camp. I didn't tell Dale about it that night. I've thought about that a lot since. We might have packed up then. If I'd told him, we might have made a different choice. On the 5th day, things got stranger in a direction I hadn't anticipated. We came back to camp from a morning hike to find our food bag, which we had hung properly. Bare line, good height, 15 feet from the trunk, on the ground. The rope was still tied above. The bag hadn't been dropped or cut. The knot hadn't slipped. The knot was still tied, perfect and tight, right where we'd made it. The food bag was simply on the ground beneath it, as though it had been lowered carefully and set down. Nothing in the bag had been touched, nothing eaten, nothing displaced. We told each other a bear. We told each other the knot had somehow slipped, that gravity and weight, and the particular looseness of whatever knot Dale had tied, had conspired to lower the bag instead of drop it. We rehung the bag. We didn't talk about what we were actually thinking. On the 6th night, I woke up at 2 a.m. because someone said my name, not loudly, conversationally. The way you'd say someone's name to get their attention in a quiet room. Raymond, right outside the tent. I lay completely still for a very long time. Dale was asleep beside me. I could hear his breathing, the specific rhythm of it, and it didn't change. I hadn't heard it, or hadn't woken to it. I did not unzip the tent. I have never, in the 33 years since, been entirely sure whether that was cowardice or the right instinct. In the morning, there were footprints. Adult male, bare feet, medium size, circling our tent in a route that was precise enough to be intentional, not wandering, not stopping and starting, a clean orbit at a consistent distance of maybe 4 feet. They came from the tree line to the east. They circled the tent 3 times. They went back into the tree line. There were no other prints around them, no disturbance of the leaf litter beyond the prints themselves, no sign of where this person had come from or gone. Dale saw them too. Dale said nothing for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, we should go. We went. We broke camp in 40 minutes, which if you've ever broken a properly established camp is very fast. We moved without discussing what we were doing, which tent stake to pull first, where to put what. We just moved. That coordination, that wordless efficiency is something I think about. The way your body knows before your mind admits it that you are in the presence of a genuine threat. We were on the trail out when we found the 7th thing. I've been calling it the 7th thing for 33 years in my own head, which tells you something about how I've organized this. Footsteps on the far bank was thing 1. The bag on the ground was thing 2. I'll spare you things 3 through 6. They were smaller, deniable, the kind of thing that only means something in aggregate. The 7th thing was not deniable. On the trail, at the junction that led out to the parking area, hung from a tree at eye level, was a collection of objects, not random, arranged. A military dog tag, the chain looped over a low branch, and the name on it was mine, my name. My service number, my blood type, it was my dog tag, the one I'd lost I'd always assumed during a field exercise in Germany in 1989 and had replaced without much thought. My dog tag in a forest in Kentucky 2 years after I'd lost it, hung in a tree on the trail we had to walk to get out. I took it down, I carried it out, I still have it. I've never found an explanation that survives scrutiny. The Army doesn't lose track of dog tags that way. They don't end up in civilian possession through any normal channel. I had no enemies. Dale had never been to Germany and had no access to my service records. The campsite had been randomly selected from a dozen we'd considered. I've carried that tag for 33 years. It's in my nightstand right now. Every few years I take it out and look at it and try again to find the rational account. I haven't found it yet. I probably won't. I'm 72 years old and I've made my peace with most things. I've made my peace with this one too, mostly. But I keep the tag because getting rid of it feels like the kind of thing you don't do until you understand it. Until you know who put it there and why and what they knew about me that I haven't yet figured out about myself. I don't camp anymore. My knees are fine, actually. My back is manageable. Some doors you don't reopen once you've been smart enough to walk away from them. Dale and I have never talked about that trip. Not once. In 33 years have we mentioned the Red River Gorge. We're still friends. We get lunch sometimes. We talk about our kids, our health, sports. There is a shared agreement between us that exists without having been stated, and we both honor it completely. Some things you carry in silence because the weight of saying them out loud is more than you want to ask of another person, even someone who was there. Story 3, the last thing Priya counted before she stopped counting was 6. 5 of them had driven up together in Lucas's truck. 5 names, 5 sleeping bags, 5 people standing in the parking area at the trailhead with their packs at their feet, and the count came back 6. Here's where it started. It was a group born from the overlap of 2 friend circles. Lucas and Priya had known each other since college. Dom and Kara were a couple, friends of Lucas's from his old job. And then Nate, who was Priya's younger brother, tagging along because he'd been going through something and needed to get out of the city for a while, and they'd made room. 5. Just 5. Lucas's truck sat 5. They'd all piled in on a Saturday morning in late September and driven 3 hours to a state forest in the mountains of western Pennsylvania. It was a good trip for the first 2 days. They set up camp efficiently. Lucas and Priya had camped together a dozen times and moved with the smooth coordination of people who've worked out the process through repetition. Dom and Kara were comfortable in the outdoors. Nate was less so but enthusiastic. The way someone in genuine distress often is about the idea of escape, any escape. They made a fire the first night and talked until late. The second day, they hiked the Upper Ridge Trail, which delivered views that justified every uphill step. They came back sunburned and tired in the good way. The counting started the second night, and it started as a joke. They were all around the fire, and Priya was trying to figure out how many granola bars they had left and whether they would cover the remaining days, and she did what you do when you're estimating group consumption. She counted heads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fine. She had 5, and she knew she had 5, and she went back to counting granola bars. 20 minutes later, without quite knowing why, she counted again. 6, she blinked, looked around. Lucas, Dom, Kara, Nate, and across the fire, slightly back from the ring, slightly beyond the full reach of the firelight, a shape she'd registered in her peripheral count as a person. She looked directly at it. A shadow. A tree. Her brain had filled in a figure because it expected one. She laughed at herself and didn't mention it, but Nate mentioned it the next morning. Casually over coffee, with the specific studied casualness of someone trying to figure out if they're the only one. Did anyone feel like there was, like, a sixth person last night at the fire? Nobody said yes immediately. There was a pause. Then Kara said slowly, I counted 6 at some point. I thought I miscounted. Dom was quiet. Lucas said he hadn't noticed. Priya said she probably just miscounted too. They left it there because they were rational adults. And there were 5 of them. And they all knew there were 5 of them, and the human brain is a fallible instrument that finds patterns in noise and fills in expected information in low light conditions. They'd all learned that in whatever psychology class they'd taken, in whatever college they'd attended. They knew. On the 3rd night, the count came back 6 twice, and Dom said at the 2nd count, okay, I see it too. What he meant was that the 6th was not a location, not the same spot twice, not a specific dark corner of the campsite that was tricking them. It seemed to migrate. First, it had appeared at the far edge of the firelight, behind where Lucas was sitting. The 2nd time, it was to Priya's right, between her and the tree line, roughly at shoulder height to a seated person. Neither time had any of them been able to look at it directly. It dissolved under direct gaze, the way something only does when it was never fully there to begin with, or that's what they told themselves. The behavior changed on the 4th day, and this is the part that still makes Priya go quiet when she tells this story. They were hiking, single file on a narrow trail, Lucas, then Dom, then Kara, then Priya, then Nate bringing up the rear, which was Nate's preference because he moved slower than the rest and didn't want to feel rushed. They'd been walking for maybe 40 minutes when Nate stopped and said, conversationally, who was that? They all stopped. Priya turned and looked. Nate was pointing back down the trail, behind them, to where the trail bent and disappeared around a rocky outcrop. There was someone there, Nate said, walking behind me. I thought it was one of you who'd fallen behind, but he looked at all 4 of them standing in front of him. There were 5 of us in front of me. Nobody said anything. They counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They stood there for a while, looking back at the empty trail. They made camp early that day by unspoken consensus, and they made the fire bigger than they needed, and they stayed closer together than they normally would. Nobody said the word that was in all of their heads. They talked about other things, and the talking was slightly forced, and they all went to bed earlier than usual. In the night, Priya woke up at 3 a.m. for no reason she could identify. She lay still and listened. The forest sounds were correct. Wind in the canopy, the creek that ran 100 feet from camp, the distant percussion of something moving through underbrush. Then she heard, very clearly, someone unzip a tent. Not her tent. She could tell by the direction. Lucas's tent, which was pitched 6 feet to her left. But Lucas had a 2-person tent that he slept in alone, having broken up with his girlfriend 2 months before this trip. She heard the zipper go down, slowly, carefully, the sound of someone trying not to make a sound. She heard the tent flap pull back. She heard nothing for a long time. Then she heard the zipper again, going up slowly, the tent closing. In the morning, she asked Lucas what he'd gotten up for in the night. Lucas said he hadn't gotten up. He said he'd slept straight through until morning. He said his tent had been closed when he woke up. They packed up and left that morning a day early. Kara drove because Lucas was shaking in a way he couldn't stop and didn't want to discuss. They drove the 3 hours back in near complete silence. Nobody has used the word sixth. Nobody has named it. Nobody has explained what opened Lucas's tent in the dark and stood there and then closed it again and left him sleeping. When Priya tells this story, and she doesn't tell it often, she always ends at the same place. She says, the worst part isn't what it was. She says the worst part is this. On the drive home, at a gas station stop 2 hours from the city, she counted heads out of pure reflex. She got 5. She doesn't know why that frightened her more than 6 ever did. Story 4. The last thing Elena thought before her sister walked out of the tree line was that she hadn't told anyone where she was going. By then, of course, it was already much too late to matter. Here's what you need to understand first. Elena Marsh and her sister Cassie had not spoken in 4 years. The falling out was the kind that happens between people who know each other too well to be kind. Something said at a family funeral that crossed a line both of them had known was there, something that could not be unsaid once it was. Elena had taken her half of the family, and Cassie had taken hers, and they'd organized their lives around the gap between them with the same careful attention other people devote to keeping things together. Elena had planned the camping trip as a reset. 1 week alone in the Allegheny National Forest in early October, when the crowds were gone and the color was at peak, and the cold at night was sharp enough to feel like progress. She was a solo camper by preference. She liked the way solitude clarified things, stripped problems back to their actual shape. She had permits, maps, a well-broken-in pack, She had told her husband and her emergency contact and filed a trip plan with the Forest Service. She had not told Cassie. She had not told Cassie anything in 4 years. So when, on the third day, she looked up from her camp stove and saw her sister standing 30 feet away at the edge of the trees, her first thought was logistical. Not why is Cassie here, but how does Cassie know where I am? And the answer to that, she realized in the same moment she was forming the thought, was that Cassie couldn't. No one who knew Cassie had known Elena's destination. The coordinates of this campsite existed on a form in a ranger station 80 miles south and in a photograph on Elena's phone. That was all. Cassie, she said. Her sister didn't answer. She was standing in the way people stand when they've been standing somewhere for longer than you realized, weight settled, arms at her sides, with the stillness of someone who has been waiting rather than someone who just arrived. She was wearing clothes that were wrong for the season, a light jacket, jeans, no pack. October in the Alleghenies gets to 35 degrees at night. Elena had a four-season sleeping bag and still found it cold. Cassie, what are you doing here? Or looked in her direction, which was not quite the same thing. There was something mildly off about the focus of her gaze, the way it landed slightly past Elena rather than on her. Elena told herself that was the distance. 30 feet in the layered shadow of late afternoon trees. You should go. Excuse me? You should leave. Right now. Pack your things. Her voice was right. Elena had not heard it in 4 years, and it was completely, unmistakably Cassie's voice, the specific flatness of it when she was serious, the Midwest vowels they'd both grown up with, and then spent years unconsciously modifying, and which still emerged in stress. It was Cassie's voice. Are you okay? Elena asked. How did you get here? Did you hike in? Where's your gear? Please, Cassie said. Pack your things and go now. Elena stood up slowly, the way you stand up when you're not sure if something is wrong, but your body has decided to treat it as if it is. Did something happen? Is it, Mom? Is it? Did someone? You need to go. Cassie's voice was louder now, a sudden urgency that didn't match the stillness of her body. Don't ask me questions. Don't try to talk to me right now. Just go. Cassie, I'm not going to I can't come any closer to you. Her sister's voice broke on this, a crack of real emotion that cut through the strangeness and landed as genuine distress. I cannot come closer. I need you to hear me. I need you to take your things and walk to the trailhead and drive away, and I need you to call me when you get to the road. Do you still have my number? Elena stood there for a long time. I still have your number, she said. Then go, right now, please. I love you, Elle. I'm sorry about what I said. I'm sorry about everything, but right now you need to move. Elena broke camp in 15 minutes. She has told herself since there was the apology that decided her, 4 years of silence, and then I'm sorry about everything, and something in that was more urgent to honor than to question. She did not look back as she packed. She heard no movement from the trees. She shouldered her pack and walked. She was 2 miles down the trail, nearly to the trailhead, when her phone picked up a signal. She called Cassie. Cassie answered on the second ring, from her apartment, in Columbus, Ohio, where she had been all week, where she had not left, where she had been homesick with a sinus infection for the past 4 days, and had not, under any circumstances, been in the Allegheny National Forest. There was a long silence on the call while each of them processed what the other was saying. Elle, Cassie said finally, very carefully. What did it look like? Elena described what she had seen. The clothes, the position, the quality of the stillness, the voice. There was another silence. That's not right, Cassie said quietly. What isn't? The clothes. The jacket you described. I own that jacket. But Elena, I haven't worn that jacket in years. I don't even know where it is. I lost it somewhere. A pause. I think I might have left it at Mom's house. Before the funeral, before the thing that was said. Elena was in her car by then. She drove with the phone on speaker and her sister on the line, talking continuously about nothing in particular, Cassie describing the show she was watching, her symptoms, her neighbor's dog that kept getting into the hallway. And Elena drove without stopping until she hit the highway, and the forest was behind her, and the familiar density of civilization was back on all sides. She made it home at midnight. The sisters are speaking again now, have been since that night, since the call, since Elena came home, and they talked until 4 a.m. about the funeral and the thing that was said, and the 4 years of silence, and all of it finally said. There's one question Elena has never asked her sister directly. She's thought about it. She's worked up to it twice and pulled back both times. The question is, did you know? Did some part of you know? 4 years of silence away, that I was in the woods, and that something else was there, and that I needed to leave? Did that part of you sense something? Is that possible? She hasn't asked because she's not sure she can handle either answer. Yes would mean the world is built differently than she thought. No would mean that whatever was standing at the edge of the trees, wearing her sister's voice and her sister's lost jacket and her sister's unfinished apology, had known enough about Elena's life to use exactly the right face. She doesn't camp alone anymore. She's thinking she might go back someday with Cassie, and try to remember what it was like before. But not to the Alleghenies. Not there. Story 5. The last thing Chris heard before his flashlight landed on the child was the sound of the child's breathing, slow, deliberate, with the specific patience of something that had been waiting in the dark for a long time. Here's what led them there. 4 men, all in their early 30s, all with the kind of marriages and mortgages and responsibilities that make a week in the wilderness feel like a medical necessity rather than a vacation. Chris Aiken, Marcus Webb, Teo Fontaine, and Joel Park had been making this trip annually since their mid-20s. A different remote location each year, a different forest, a rotating roster of discomforts they'd grown to love. This year it was the Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois, a place none of them had been, chosen by Marcus off a list of the most isolated tracts of public land in the Midwest. Minimal cell service. No loop trails, just in and out the same path. Just the kind of forgotten American forest that feels like it hasn't been looked at directly in years. Day 1 through day 3, perfect. The trail was well marked but rarely traveled. They passed one other group, a couple of older men going the other direction, who nodded and kept moving. They made good miles each day, camped early, cooked well. The woods were old growth in stretches, the canopy high enough to give the forest floor an almost cathedral quality, the light at midday filtering down green and still. The child appeared on the 4th night. They had made camp in a small depression sheltered from the wind, a natural campsite that seemed chosen by others before them. There was an old fire ring, a ring of stones, not recent but clearly intentional. They'd built their fire inside it and eaten dinner and were in the comfortable post-dinner state of people who are tired enough to sleep but not quite ready to stop talking. It was Marcus who heard it first. He held up a hand for quiet, and they all went still and listened, crying. Not nearby, 100 yards off, maybe more. Then and intermittent, the specific high-register sound of a young child in distress. They looked at each other. There is no way, Teo said. We're a day and a half from the trailhead, Joel said. No family is going to be. I'm going to get my flashlight, Chris said. They all got their flashlights. They moved toward the sound together, which was the right call. None of them said so explicitly, but none of them had any intention of going alone. The crying was intermittent, which made triangulating it difficult. It would stop for a minute, then start again from what seemed like a slightly different direction, which they told themselves was the acoustic effect of trees and topography. They told themselves this for about 3 minutes. Then they found the child, a small girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, sitting at the base of a large oak with her knees drawn to her chest. She was wearing a yellow dress, summery, thin, completely wrong for the 48-degree night, and sneakers with no socks, no jacket, no backpack, no indication of any gear whatsoever. She was sitting with her eyes open and her face wet from crying, looking at the ground in front of her, and she did not look up when the 4 flashlight beams found her. Hey, Chris said gently, stopping a few feet away, crouching to her level. Hey, it's okay. We're not going to hurt you. Are you lost? Where are your parents? The girl said nothing. My name is Chris. What's your name? Nothing. Are you cold? We have warm things back at our camp. She looked up. The flashlight beams were on her face, and her eyes were fine. Pupils contracting correctly in the light, no cloudiness, no sign of the glassy disconnection of shock or hypothermia. She looked at Chris with complete, clear comprehension. She understood that he was talking to her. She had decided not to answer. We need to get you warmed up, Marcus said, taking off his fleece and stepping forward to put it around her shoulders. She flinched back hard, pressed herself flat against the oak. Her eyes went to Marcus with something that was not fear, or not only fear. It was warning. The specific look of a child who is afraid of something other than the thing that is standing in front of them, afraid for the thing that is standing in front of them. They all stopped. The forest, which had been providing the usual ambient sound of a late October night in the Midwest, had gone very quiet. Not gradually quiet, immediately quiet. The way sound doesn't naturally stop, all at once, as though something with authority had switched it off. We need to get her out of here, Joel said very quietly. The girl's eyes went to Joel. She shook her head once, small and definite. We can't leave her, Teo said. She shook her head again. She doesn't want to go, Chris said. He was still crouched at her level, and he was looking at her very carefully. She doesn't want us to take her, but she also doesn't. He stopped, looked at her. You're not lost, are you? The girl looked at him. You know where you are. Her expression shifted by a fraction. Not confirmation, exactly, but not denial. Are you trying to warn us? Chris said. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked deliberately in the direction they had come from. Back toward camp, she looked for a long time. Then she looked back at Chris. They ran. Chris has no cleaner description than that. They ran. He doesn't know whether he decided to run or whether his body decided for him, but all four of them moved at the same moment, back through the trees toward camp, and the girl did not follow. What was at camp when they got there? The fire, burning normally. Their tents, undisturbed. They're exactly as they'd left it. Nothing visibly wrong, nothing moved, except the smell. Animal. Rank and close, and utterly wrong for what should be in these woods. Not deer, not skunk, not any of the normal olfactory vocabulary of a Midwestern forest. Something that Chris's brain kept trying to categorize and failing. He would later describe it as the smell of something that had been in a space for a very long time without cleaning it. They broke camp in the dark. They hiked out with headlamps at a pace that wasn't quite running, but was faster than any of them acknowledged out loud. They reached the trailhead at 3 a.m. and sat in Marcus's truck with all the doors locked until the sun came up. They filed a report with the Forest Service about the child. 2 rangers went in the next morning. They found no child, no footprints, no evidence of a camp or a missing person. They found, near a large oak about 100 yards north of where the men had camped, a small circular depression in the leaf litter that could have been made by a child sitting with knees to chest. Could have been. Chris has thought about her for 3 years. The yellow dress, the cold, the precision of her warning, if that's what it was. He thinks about what she was pointing at when she looked back toward their camp. He thinks about what she was protecting them from, if she was protecting them, and whether it worked. He thinks about this specifically. She was there, she was cold. And whatever was at camp was bad enough that she would not leave the oak tree to come to 4 adults with flashlights and warm clothes and a clearly stated willingness to help her. She chose to stay with what she knew rather than risk approaching what they had camped beside. He does not know what that means. He knows it hasn't left him. Story 6. The last thing the counselor told the children at Camp Wannapoke before lights out every summer without variation, for as long as anyone could remember, was this: don't go into the woods past the creek after dark. Not because of animals, not because of the dark, because of the wampalung. And if you hear it breathing, don't run. Here's what happened to the person who ran. My name is Sadie, and I was a junior counselor at Camp Wannapoke for 2 summers, and I want to be clear that I went in as a skeptic and came out as something else entirely. Camp Wannapoke sits in the northern Catskills on land that the camp's founders acquired in 1937 from a local family who sold it at below market rate and would not explain why, a detail that every Wannapoke counselor learns in their first week and files under interesting history without examining too closely. The camp runs for 8 weeks each summer, ages 8 through 16, a mix of outdoor skills and wilderness education, and the particular alchemy of structured childhood that turns anxious kids into something more like themselves. The Wampalung story is the camp's oldest tradition. Every counselor tells it. Every era of campers has heard it. It exists in roughly a dozen versions, accumulated over decades, the way all good horror accretes, each teller adding a detail, sharpening an edge, but the core of it never changes. The Wampalung is made of darkness, not a dark creature made of darkness, the way you are made of water and carbon and electricity. It lives in the forest past the creek. It does not hurt the children it finds because it is not interested in hurting them. It is interested in keeping them. The counselors tell it around the fire on the 3rd night by tradition. The year I was there, I told it to my cabin of 12-year-olds with all the theatrical commitment the tradition demanded. I believed none of it and performed all of it. The thing I did not know that first summer was that there was a second story, a real one. The one the senior counselors told each other when the campers were asleep. The one nobody wrote down. There was a child in 1962, a boy named Peter Greer, 11 years old, cabin 4. The details were specific in the way that specific details are. It was a Tuesday in mid-July, a hot night, and Peter had left his cabin at approximately 11 p.m., which was confirmed by his cabin mates, who were awake and heard him leave and assumed he was going to the bathroom. He had walked, they said, in the wrong direction, away from the bathhouse, toward the creek. Toward the tree line, the counselors noticed he was gone at the midnight check. They searched. They found him at 2 a.m., sitting at the base of a large pine on the far side of the creek, 20 feet into the forest, past the tree line. Here is what the boy told them, and what the senior staff had been telling each other since. He had heard something breathing. Close in his cabin, close enough that he had thought at first it was his cabin mate who slept in the bunk below his. Then he realized it was coming from outside the window. He had gone to look. And at the window he had seen, or not seen exactly, but registered a shape that was darker than the dark around it, the way a black object is still visible against a black background if you look at it from the right angle. It was looking at him. He ran. He ran, which is the thing you are not supposed to do. He did not know the rule yet. The counselors told the rule on the 3rd night, and Peter had arrived on a Saturday. It was only Tuesday. He had not been told, if you hear it breathing, don't run. The counselors found him at the base of the pine, and what they described in the account that got passed down was this. The boy was unhurt. He was sitting up, eyes open, entirely calm. He did not cry. He did not respond to his name immediately. There was a delay, several seconds, before he turned to look at them, and when he turned, there was something briefly wrong with his eyes, something they all mentioned in the account, but none of them could precisely describe, something about the quality of his focus, as though the part of him doing the looking had only just returned to the correct location. He was fine afterward. He went home at the end of the session. He grew up and had a life. But none of the counselors who were there that night went into the woods past the creek after dark again. Not once for the rest of their summers at Wanapok. Not for any reason. I heard this story at the end of my first summer, and I came back for a second. I came back because I am the kind of person who has to understand things. I know this about myself. It is not always an asset. My second summer, I went past the creek. It was a Wednesday night in August, midnight, and I had told myself I was just going to look. I had my flashlight and my pepper spray and my radio, and I had told myself I would cross the creek and stand at the tree line for 60 seconds and turn around. 60 seconds of darkness. Enough to say I'd done it, enough to look at what was there, which was trees, just trees, and whatever anxiety and tradition had built into a 70-year-old ghost story. I crossed the creek. The water was ankle-deep and cold. I stood at the tree line. I heard nothing. I counted to 60. I turned around. It was standing between me and the creek. I don't know how to describe it in a way that won't sound like performance. I've tried for years, and I always fail in the same direction, toward imprecision, because precision requires categories, and this thing didn't fit mine. It was dark where the night around it was merely dim. It was roughly the shape of something tall that was also wide, which is a contradiction that is nonetheless what I saw. It had no features I could distinguish, but I could hear it breathing. I did not run. I stood there for what felt like 5 minutes and was probably 40 seconds, and I did not run, and I thought about Peter Greer and his 11-year-old self making the wrong choice, because no one had told him the rule. I stood there and I breathed and I did not run. Then I walked backward to the creek. I kept my eyes on it. It did not move. I crossed the creek without falling, which felt like a minor miracle. I walked back to the counselor cabin and I got into my bed and I lay there until morning. In the morning, everything was normal. I told the senior counselors what I had done. The oldest one, a woman in her 60s who had been at Wanapok for 30 years and who I had always assumed was performing the tradition for the benefit of the campers, looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "You didn't run." "No," I said. "Good," she said. And she said nothing else about it ever. I don't know what the Wampalung is. I don't know if that's even the right word for it, or where the word came from, or what the people who named it understood that we've forgotten. I know that I stood 20 feet from it and I didn't run and I walked away. I know that Peter Greer ran and came back to himself slowly, and that the part of him that returned to his eyes after a delay is something no one has ever adequately explained. I know that the camp is still there, that the tradition is still told. Third night around the fire every summer. And I know that somewhere in the back of every telling, underneath the theater and the ghost story rhythms, is a real piece of information delivered to every child who comes through. Don't run. Not because it sounds good. Because someone learned it the hard way and wanted to make sure you didn't have to. Story 7. The last thing they noticed before they got home was that the mud on their boots was different from the mud at the campsites. They'd been camping on dry granite ridge. There was no mud on the ridge, but their boots were caked in it. Deep, dark, riverine mud, and neither of them could explain when they'd walked through it. Here's the full story. Brendan and Yuri had been planning the Cascades trip for 2 years. Not a casual weekend, a 7-day technical backcountry route in a section of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest that required permits that were difficult to get and experience that took years to accumulate. Brendan was 40, a former wilderness guide who'd been working a desk job for a decade and treated these trips as maintenance. Yuri was 38, an engineer, meticulous in the way engineers often are about things they care about. The gear was tested, the food was calculated to the calorie, the route was mapped 3 ways. They drove from Portland on a Friday morning and reached the trailhead before noon. The road maintenance ended 5 miles before the trailhead. This was noted on the permit documentation and expected. The last 5 miles were a rough dirt road that required a high-clearance vehicle, which Yuri's truck was. The road was passable, but barely overgrown on both shoulders, the kind of road that exists because someone needed it once and no one has needed it since. The trees pressed in close on both sides. The end of maintenance meant the end of guardrails, the end of grading, the end of any human imposition on what the road wanted to be, which was forest again. Beyond the trailhead, maintained trails picked up, and those were fine. The first 5 days were everything they'd planned. The route delivered, High lakes, granite spires, one morning with a view that Brendan photographed and then put his camera away because the photograph would never be accurate. They camped well, moved well, argued about nothing more consequential than route finding on the third day. On the sixth day, coming down from the high route toward the valley approach that would lead them back to the trailhead, they found something on the trail. It was a cairn unusual, hikers leave cairns. But this one was in the middle of a section of trail that neither of their maps marked as a junction or waypoint, and it was wrong in the way bad directions are wrong. Convincingly structured, clearly intentional, pointing off trail in a direction that their GPS put as perpendicular to their heading. Someone had spent time on it. It was 8 stones, balanced well, with a flat capstone that had been placed with care. They photographed it and ignored it. An hour later, another cairn. Same construction style, same perpendicular direction indicated. Someone's trying to route us somewhere, Yuri said. Animals don't build cairns, Brendan said. They stayed on trail. By nightfall, they were camped in the valley on schedule. Normal night. Nothing. They went to sleep, and Brendan woke once at around 3 a.m., as he often did in the backcountry, and lay listening to the specific silence of high mountains and found it correct. He went back to sleep. In the morning, they broke camp and started the valley traverse back toward the trailhead. 2 hours in, Brendan noticed they were passing a section of forest that looked familiar. Did we pass this already? He asked. Yuri checked his GPS. No, we've been heading northeast. That rock formation, Brendan said. I remember that. Yuri looked. We haven't passed it. I'm telling you, I remember it. Yuri brought up the map. Their GPS coordinates were exactly where they should be, 2 miles into the valley traverse on heading. The map showed no rock formation matching what Brendan was describing within 2 miles of their position. They moved on. 20 minutes later, the same rock formation. Yuri checked the GPS. Same coordinates as before. They stood in the trail for a long time without speaking. Brendan walked to the formation and touched it, and it was solid, real granite with lichen that had been growing for decades. He looked at the GPS on Yuri's phone. He looked at the formation. What is this? He said. I don't know, Yuri said. They moved faster after that, and the valley cooperated. They reached the trailhead in the time they expected, and everything downstream of that point was normal. The rough road. The maintained highway, Portland. It was Brendan's wife who noticed the mud that night when he came in and started unlacing his boots in the entryway. She looked at them and said, Where did you walk through that? The mud was dark, almost black, the kind of deep bottomland mud you find at creek confluences and boggy valleys, nothing like the dry granite ridge they'd camped on or the Pine Needle Valley floor they'd traversed. Yuri, when Brendan called him, reported the same thing on his boots. Neither of them had walked through mud. Neither of them could account for it. What they've come to, in the years since, is an understanding that the cairns were routing them towards something, that when they refused to follow, the thing that had built the cairns tried something else. The repetition, the loop, the section of trail that returned them to the same rock formation, and that somewhere in the gap between the trailhead and their cars, in time that both of them registered as normal and consecutive, something else happened. Where the mud came from, they do not know. What they walked through to acquire it, they cannot tell you. Yuri has the GPS data from the trip backed up on 3 separate drives. He looks at it sometimes. The coordinates for the looping section appear in the track log as normal consecutive points, regular intervals, no anomaly. The device recorded a normal transit. The device recorded something. Whether it recorded what actually happened is a question Brendan is no longer confident he can answer. The road maintenance ends 5 miles from that trailhead. Next time you're somewhere like that, somewhere past the last guardrail, past the last sign of maintained human territory, look for cairns that point the wrong way. Look for trails that return you to where you've already been. Look at your boots when you get home. If there's mud that shouldn't be there, don't spend too much time trying to reconstruct where it came from. Sometimes the gap between the forest and your front door is longer than you think. Sometimes something that wanted to redirect you succeeds, and what happens in that time is not something you get to keep. Story 8, the last thing Mason said before they turned around to go back was, I think we should pray. He was not a religious man. That's the part that still gets his brother. Here's what they drove into. Mason Steck Pruitt were Georgia boys, born and raised in Savannah, and they knew the Georgia backwoods the way you know the back of your own hand, intimately and without examination. They'd been hunting and camping in the Okefenokee margins and the Chattooga corridor since they were teenagers, sometimes with their father, eventually without him, always with the specific ease of men in a landscape that belonged to them as much as anything belongs to anyone. In their 30s, with kids and jobs and all the rest of it, the annual camping trip had become ritual, a hard line on the calendar. 4 days in September, just the two of them. The problem was the location change. Their usual site, a spot they'd been using for 12 years, a creekside camp on national forest land in the North Georgia mountains, had been closed for timber operations. They'd found this out 2 weeks before the trip and had scrambled to find something comparable. A friend of a friend mentioned some land in a county Dex, didn't recognize deep in the coastal plain down near the Florida line. Private land, apparently belonging to someone who let people camp there if you knew who to call. Dex made the call. They got permission and rough directions. They should have asked more questions. The drive-in was the first sign, and they talked about it later. Both of them had felt something on the drive, something that neither would name because naming it would have required turning around, and both of them had been too committed to the trip to want to turn around. The land was flat and strange, palmetto scrub and longleaf pine in an ancient heavy silence. The roads became unpaved and then became tracks and then became suggestions. They passed no other vehicles. The GPS died an hour in the way electronics sometimes do in certain kinds of nothing, not the normal cell signal dropout, but a clean cessation, the screen going to black and not responding. They found the campsite by the description they'd been given. A clearing near a dry creek bed, a fire ring, a ruined hunting stand and a pine at the clearing's edge. It was right, it was all there. It was also surrounded on 3 sides by posted signs that should not have been there, not the normal private property signs. These were older, weathered to illegibility in spots, hand-painted, and what could be read on them was not no trespassing but something else. Dex, who'd been an English major before he'd become a claims adjuster, got close enough to read one before Mason pulled him back. He said later that the signs were in English, but that reading them had felt like reading something in a language he only mostly understood. He retained an impression of prohibition, of boundary marking, not keep out but something more like a description of what the land was for. As if someone had classified it rather than fenced it. They set up camp. Mason grilled on a camp stove and they ate and talked the way brothers talk about their father who was getting old and their kids who were growing up and the 12 other things that accrued over a year of separate lives. The first night was unremarkable except for one thing, which Dex only mentioned in the morning. He had heard sometime after midnight what sounded like a church service. Voices, multiple, distant in unison. Not music, spoken word, rhythmic, the cadence of responsive reading or group prayer. He had lain awake and listened for perhaps 20 minutes. Then it stopped, and he slept. Out here? Mason said. It was distant, Dex said. Could have been anything. On the second night, Mason heard it too, closer. He said later that the thing he noticed was the rhythm. Not a rhythm you could tap your foot to, but a biological one, the rhythm of breath, groups of people breathing together and underneath it, or within it, or behind it, a sound that was harder to categorize. A low, sustained tone. Not human, not mechanical, something between the two, something that seemed to have intention without origin. He lay in his tent for a long time. Then he unzipped the tent and sat outside. The sound was coming from the south, from a stand of cypress, heavy and dark, maybe 200 yards from the clearing. He sat in the camp chair and listened, and the sound did not stop and did not vary for a long time, and then it changed. Not louder, but closer, which is different. The way the sensation of something near you is different from the sensation of something coming towards you, even if the distance is nominally the same. He woke Dex. They sat together in camp chairs with their flashlights pointed at the cypress stand, and the sound continued, and neither of them shone the light into the trees. It was Dex who said at first, "We should go." Mason said, "I think we should pray." He has never, before or since, said anything like this unprompted. He was raised Baptist in the abstract, holiday and funeral way, and has not attended church as an adult. The statement came out of him without premeditation. Dex said, "Okay," and they did. Not formally, nothing they could recite from memory, just talking out loud in the dark at the cypress trees, asking for whatever help was available from whatever might be listening. The sound stopped while they were doing it, immediately. Between one breath and the next, the sound was gone, and the night was normal, and the cypress stand was just cypress. They left at first light without discussing it. They have been back to the North Georgia mountains every year since, to the regular spot once the timber operation cleared out, and they have not discussed going south again. There are 2 things Mason carries from that night. The first is the obvious one. The sound. The cypress, what was in the trees, what they'd been camping beside without knowing it. The second is smaller and, he says, stranger. When he told Dex they should pray, it wasn't anxiety talking, and it wasn't habit. It was a specific recognition, a knowledge, immediate and clean, the way you know a smell, that whatever was in the cypress stand was something that prayer worked on. Something that had a relationship to that particular human act and changed its behavior in response to it. He can't explain where that knowledge came from. He can't explain what it implies about what was in the trees. He has gone back to church, irregularly, without making a big thing of it. Dex says he went back too, which surprised him. Dex had been the more skeptical brother, the one who'd pushed back on their father's faith with the particular energy of a firstborn son. But he goes now. They haven't talked about why. They don't need to. Georgia keeps its oldest things in the deepest, flattest places. The places where the roads become tracks, and the tracks become suggestions, and the GPS goes dark. The places where somebody posted signs that weren't quite warnings. The things in those places have been there a long time. They remember what works on them. They just hope you don't figure it out too late. The last thing she read before she understood was a single line at the bottom of the final page, written in a different hand from everything else. It said, "If you are reading this, leave it where you found it." She had not left it where she found it. Her name is Wren, and she buys camping gear at estate sales the way other people buy vintage clothes, for the utility and for the story, because old gear is better made and better broken in, and because every piece of equipment that survives its original owner carries something of them: tents, stoves, sleeping bags. She has a pack collection. She tells people it's about sustainability. The backpack she bought that March was at an estate sale in a ranch house outside Bozeman, Montana, belonging to a man named Carl Hadley, who had died at 81. His children were selling everything. The backpack was an external frame model from the 1970s, aluminum frame, canvas straps, solid as a car, the kind of thing people used before gear became engineered and light. It was tagged at $15. She paid it. She found the pages at home when she was cleaning the pack before her spring trip. They were in a sealed inner pocket she'd missed at the sale, a zipper hidden beneath a layer of weatherproof canvas, the kind of pocket designed for documents or valuables, flat and interior. Inside the pocket was a bundle of pages, folded twice, secured with a rubber band that crumbled when she touched it. The pages were handwritten, in dense, precise script that reminded her of old medical records. Ballpoint pen. The writing was consistent, the same hand throughout, same pressure, same spacing, except for that final line. Carl Hadley had been keeping a journal. Not a regular journal, not a record of daily life. This was a record of one specific thing. A camping trip he had taken in 1973, alone, into the Bob Marshall Wilderness in northwest Montana, a month-long solo traverse. The Bob Marshall is one of the largest wilderness areas in the lower 48, millions of acres of roadless terrain. Carl had gone alone, which even now would be considered ambitious, and in 1973 would have been considered extreme. The first week of the journal was exactly what you'd expect. Weather, terrain, wildlife, the precise and satisfied record of a man doing something very hard, very well. Carl was a good writer in the utilitarian way of people who write only for utility, clear, specific, no poetry for its own sake, the right word without fuss. The second week was different. On day 8, Carl wrote about finding a campsite that was already occupied when he arrived. Not by people, by objects. A fire ring, clearly recently used, still warm. A single boot, left boot, men's size 10 or 11, sitting beside the ring, a straight razor, cleaned and closed, a tin cup, empty. No tent, no pack, no right boot, no person. Carl had set up camp 50 feet away, noted the objects in his journal, and gone to sleep. In the morning, the objects were gone. Not moved, gone, including the fire ring, which should have left ash. On day 10, Carl heard someone behind him on a trail where he'd seen no other signs of passage for 3 days. He turned around. No one there. On day 11, he heard his name. This is the part of the journal that Wren has returned to many times because of the specificity of Carl's description. He was a precise man. He wrote, "Heard my name spoken once clearly, at a distance I would estimate at 30 yards, coming from the northwest. Immediately turned. No one visible on the trail or in the trees for the full distance I could see. The voice was male, unknown to me. Said only my name once, with the inflection you use when calling to get someone's attention. I am certain of this." And then, in a new paragraph, "This is the third unusual event in 4 days. I am noting this correlation. The journal continued for 2 more weeks. Carl had not left the Bob Marshall after the voice. He had continued his traverse. What changed was the nature of his entries, which became increasingly focused on a presence he was tracking the way you track an animal, by sign, by inference, by pattern, not footprints, disturbance. Air pressure changes he noted with almost scientific detachment. The sense of being preceded on a trail, of finding passages through underbrush that suggested recent passage where no other humans had been, once, an impression in a patch of soft ground that was human in shape, but wrong in proportion. Too long in the leg, too wide in the shoulder, with toes that pressed deeper than heels. He wrote, "I no longer think it wants to harm me. I think it is curious. But the quality of that curiosity is not comfortable. It is the curiosity of something that has not seen my kind in a long time and is deciding what I am." On day 24, Carl wrote his longest entry. He had woken in the night to find his tent open and the thing standing outside it. He wrote, "Approximately 6 feet from my tent, upright, facing my direction. I could not determine its nature in the dark, only its approximate shape, which was large and roughly bilateral and not consistent with any animal I know to be present in this area. It did not move while I watched it, which was perhaps 4 minutes. I lay still and breathed evenly, and after 4 minutes it moved away, into the trees without sound. I closed my tent. I did not sleep again. He finished his traverse on day 31 and walked out of the Bob Marshall on his own feet in good health. His final entry was a weather summary and a gear assessment. Efficient. Practical. Carl. The final line, in different handwriting and different ink, said, "If you are reading this, leave it where you found it." Ren does not know who wrote that last line. Carl Hadley lived alone after his wife died in 2001. His children she eventually tracked down via the estate sale company had not looked through the pack. They didn't know about the pocket. She thinks Carl wrote it himself later, perhaps much later. In a moment of either clarity or fear, having decided that the right thing to do with what he knew was to return it to the weight of an inner pocket and a disintegrating rubber band and the mercy of not being found. She made a choice he didn't. She read it. She typed it out in full. She has it. She takes it camping with her sometimes, the transcription, the account of the thing in the Bob Marshall that decided what Carl was and found it, interesting enough to spend 23 nights shadowing him through a wilderness the size of a small country. The pack she sold back to an estate sale reseller with the pocket still there, the original pages still inside. She thought about that last line for a long time before she did it. She left the pages. She doesn't know if that was the right call. She knows that Carl kept the pack for 50 years and didn't get rid of it. She knows he didn't destroy the pages either, which he could have done any time. She thinks he was keeping them for someone. She thinks maybe he was keeping them for her. She doesn't know why she thinks this. She knows it's not rational. She knows she's been sleeping better since she returned the pages. Whether those things are connected is a question she's decided she doesn't want answered. Story 10. The last thing the voice on the radio said before the signal broke up was, "There are 7 of us. Please don't bring the others in." The rescue team had been told there were 12. Here's what happened in the 10 days before they heard that transmission. The field camp at Axel Base was a permanent science installation on the Ross Ice Shelf, manned year-round by a rotating roster of researchers. In early June of the previous season, during the Southern Hemisphere winter, when the shelf is locked in polar night and the temperatures drop to ranges that make equipment failure a daily variable and human error a mortal one, contact was lost, not gradually. Not the typical degraded signal of a storm system passing over the comms array. All at once on a Tuesday morning, mid-transmission, the voice of the base commander stopped and the line went silent and did not come back. 12 researchers were at Axel Base. All hands, no rotations pending. 12 people who stopped answering on a Tuesday morning. The response team was assembled in 8 days, which is fast by Antarctic logistics standards. 4 experienced polar field operators, 2 physicians, a communications specialist, 2 supply techs, 9 people in total, plus equipment for contingency extraction of all 12 personnel. They flew from McMurdo, helicopter transit to a staging point, then overland traversed by snowcat to within 5 kilometers of Axel Base, beyond which a sastrugi field made vehicle travel impractical. They made contact on the radio during the overland approach. The signal was weak and fragmented. The base's primary antenna array had clearly sustained damage, but it was there and it was a human voice, and it was saying recognizable things, asking for their ETA, confirming they were coming. The voice was male, calm, slightly fragmented by static. The rescue team's comm specialist, whose name was Patrice, logged the first contact and confirmed identity. The caller stated he was Dr. Bren Halvard, station geophysicist, one of the 12. They asked what had happened. A long pause. Then, "We had an event." "What kind of event?" "We need to brief you when you arrive. Please confirm how many are in your team." 9, Patrice said. Another pause. "We have wounded. We're going to need everyone." They continued the traverse. They made contact 3 more times over the next 2 hours, each time with the same voice, each time getting operational information, the state of the base's heating system, compromised but functional, the medical situation, 3 serious injuries, the structural status of the main hab, stable, the voice was composed and practical. It gave them exactly what they needed. 4 kilometers from the base, the signal improved. And with the improvement came a second voice, a different voice. Also male, also calm, but with a different quality or a different location, Patrice thought, as though the second person was farther from the transmitter than the first. The second voice said, without preamble, "This is Dr. Halvard. I don't know who has been speaking to you." The team stopped moving. In the silence of the Snowcat's engine idling, Patrice said, very carefully, "Dr. Halvard, we've been in contact with someone at the base who identified himself as you. How long have you been in contact?" "Approximately 2 hours. We have been in comm blackout for 2 hours. We only now restored partial antenna function. This is the first transmission we've made since contact was lost." The team leader, a woman named Brecky who had done 4 polar deployments and did not use language like this lightly, said, "Then who the hell has been talking to us?" No one answered. Brecky laid out the situation in terse operational terms. 2 voices claiming the same identity, both calm, both functionally coherent, one of them on the line for 2 hours with no transmission record from the base's end. She asked for a head count from Halvard. He gave it. 7. 7 survivors, 3 serious injuries. 5 were missing, unaccounted for since the event, whatever the event was. 5 people who had gone out of the hab and not returned. 7 survivors, not 12. "Please don't bring the others in," the first voice said. The signal had degraded again, fragmenting, but the words were clear. The team assumed this meant the missing 5. Don't bring the missing 5 back. They're not coming back, or they can't be brought back, or something else. Patrice logged it, but Brecky read it differently. She said it later, in debrief with the specific precision of someone who'd had days to turn it over. It didn't say don't look for the others. It said don't bring them in, as in don't bring them into the base, as in they're out there and you're going to find them, and when you do not bring them inside. They reached Axel Base, 7 survivors, all accounted for, all in the condition Halvard had described. The missing 5 were not found that day, or the following day, or the 3rd day. On the 4th day of search, they found 3 of them. They were 3 kilometers from the base, in a section of shelf that was topographically unremarkable, flat, featureless, no crevasse field, no obvious hazard. They were sitting upright in the snow, in a triangle formation, equidistant from each other. Their gear was intact. Their vitals, when checked, were, and the medical team's word was confusing enough that Patrice wrote it down verbatim, present but abnormal. Heartbeat, respiration, present. Temperature, responsiveness. Abnormal in a direction the physician described as inconsistent with the duration of exposure. They were alive. They were brought to the base hab. Brecky, in the moment of bringing them in, remembered the transmission. Don't bring the others in. She said later that she thought about stopping. She thought about it for 10 seconds, standing at the hab door with 3 recovered personnel. She brought them in. The 2 missing 5th persons were never found. The 3 who were recovered did not speak for 4 days. Then they spoke, and what they said was coherent, and what they said was normal, and what they said contained no information about what had happened in the 72 hours they'd been unaccounted for. They didn't know what had happened. They didn't know they'd been outside. They thought it was still Tuesday morning. The first voice on the radio, the one that had been talking to the team for 2 hours before Halvard's actual transmission, was never identified. No one at the base had transmitted during that period. The recordings from the team's comms log were reviewed by 3 separate technical specialists and confirmed authentic. The voice was real. The signal was real. The transmission had occurred. The source was not. In the debrief document, which is not classified but is not publicized, Brecky wrote a single recommendation. If you are mounting a rescue operation in polar night and make contact with survivors before you reach the site, verify identity through a secondary channel before accepting operational guidance, because something in those conditions, in that darkness, at those distances, in whatever happens to communication systems under polar night in places that are genuinely structurally unobserved by anyone or anything, is capable of sounding exactly like help. She does not speculate on what it wanted. She has her guess. It didn't want the 3 outside to come in. Maybe it had a reason. Maybe those 4 days of silence before they started speaking, 4 days where they sat in the hab and watched the walls and did not answer questions. Maybe those 4 days were not recovery. Maybe they were adjustment. She doesn't know. She signed off on all 3 as medically cleared. She had to. There was nothing wrong with them that she could document. She thinks about the 2 who were never found. She thinks about what they might have become in the ice, in the dark, in whatever happens out there when the shelf is locked in winter and no one is looking. She thinks. Not lost. Just somewhere the rescue team wasn't supposed to bring back,